Thank you all for attending this AAA online briefing series on how to build a thriving culture of neuro-acceptance and workplace design, brought to you by Auticon. My name is Simon Bush, and I'm the CEO of the AAA. It's an absolute pleasure to be host of these informative webinars with our value partner at Auticon. Please note this event is being recorded and there will be opportunities for questions. So please use the Q&A function and try and make this as interactive as possible. We'll start on time, and noting that we'll probably have more attendees joining us as we get started in the next few minutes. Let us begin today by recognising the tens of thousands of years of innovation that have been handed down through the generations from the original custodians of the various lands we meet on today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging traditional owners and custodians, and also pay my respects to elders past and present. Now it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to Yvonne at Auticon. Yvonne.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar in our three-part webinar series, The Advantage of Building a Neurodiverse Organization. Now, in our last webinar, which we ran last month, we looked at the business case for neurodiversity, a CIO and leadership perspective. If you would like to go back to this and review this session, then simply head to the member portal on the AIIA website or the Auticon Australia YouTube page, and you will find it there. Now, in this webinar, we will explore workplace design, how to build a thriving culture of neuro-acceptance. And then our final session, webinar 3, which we will run in September, is on how to empower neurodivergent talent to enrich your innovation strategy. So stay tuned and make sure you grab some tickets for the final session. Now, before we dive into today's discussion, let me start to give you just a short overview of Auticon and what we're all about. First, opening our doors in Germany in 2011, Auticon is an award-winning social innovation company. We are an autistic majority business with 465 autistic employees located in 15 countries around the world. Autistic technologists work with performing as software developers, data analysts, quality engineering engineers, and also testing and so on. So it's quite a broad range of IT specializations that we bring into companies. And our clients, they experience our outstanding autistic professionals firsthand, and then also their open minds, and our clients are able to achieve their diversity goals. Our model improves the economic and social conditions of the autistic community with quality careers, unlocking opportunity, and empowering client organizations through actionable neurodiversity training and also advisory services. So if you're interested and want to learn more about it, please get in touch. Now at Auticon, our employees build lifelong careers in technology, discovering personal autonomy and also improved self-esteem. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our host for today's webinar. We've got Auticon's Australia and New Zealand lead neuro-inclusion specialist. Yes, that is a very, very long title. Meredith Warren. So Meredith has more than 20 years experience working with autistic people, and she's also a mother of an autistic child. Meredith is passionate about empowering autistic individuals, their families, and spreading the word about inclusion, acceptance, engagement, and the benefits of neurodiverse workplaces. Yes, you will hear from the best today. She's successfully advocating for a Victorian autism state plan on behalf of the autism community, and was instrumental in driving the campaign to have autism recognized as a disability in its own right within the Victorian state legislation. So well done. Now, Meredith, I'm handing this over to you, and I believe we have some amazing guests in today's webinar.
Thanks, Yvonne. Yes, we absolutely do have some great guests with us today. So our first guest is Megan Hall. Megan is Learning and Development Coordinator at Monash IVF Group. She is a psychology graduate from Curtin University and understands the importance and benefits of creating inclusive spaces that embrace neurodiversity. Throughout her academic journey, she found herself becoming increasingly drawn to the concept of neurodiversity and is passionate about raising awareness and acceptance of neurodivergent individuals, not only in her own workplace, but also catering to the needs of neurodivergent individuals seeking the services of Monash IVF. Welcome, Megan. Our next guest is Customised Employment Specialist from 4GR. 4GR is a registered NDIS provider that work with people who may experience various barriers in finding employment. Beth Evans is director at 4GR, and she is passionate about teaching individuals to have a sense of agency, self-efficacy, and how to increase economic participation within community. Welcome, Beth. Finally, we have Chris Varney. Chris is an autistic law graduate and a pioneer of autistic-led service provision in Australia. He has a background in children's rights and youth programs, having been 2009 Australian Youth Representative to the UN and World Vision Australia's Manager of Youth. Founding the ICANN network in 2013, Chris has grown it into Australia's largest autistic-led organisation with over 70 autistic staff and more than 2,000 young autistic people in the program nationally. Chris was also a recipient of the 2017 Supreme Court of Victoria's Best Achievement in Human Rights Award. He serves as National Patron of the Australian Association for Special Education and is the chairperson of the Victorian Disability Advisory Council. Welcome, Chris. And welcome everyone to today's webinar. Just one small item of housekeeping. You will see that there is a QR code and an ID there on the screen. We use technology, an app called Vivox, and I'll be using that to do some polling later on in the webinar, but I'll let you know when. So you can scan the QR code and open that throughout the day, and we'll get to that later. But also towards the end of our discussion with Beth, Megan and Chris, we will be opening up to the audience for questions. So if you think of a question that you'd like to ask during the session, just pop it into the chat session and we'll answer it at the end of the discussion. Now, just a little bit more in depth about our NIS specialist team and the 360 support. So here you can see is just a few aspects of how we provide the 360 support model to our autistic technologists, but also to the clients and the companies that they work on. So we are very much wedded to a couple of concepts, nothing about me without me, but also a holistic and approach where we are supporting our technologists in the workplace. So things like workplace adjustments, and sensory supports that may be required when they're working on site, things like unwritten rules and so forth. So as Yvonne said, if you have any more questions about our model and our 360 support or training, please, just reach out to us. Part of what we do is the NIS training, and this is provided to our clients, but also to any interested organisations who may be commencing or, furthering their journey into neurodiversity and inclusion. And during the training, we like to ask this important question so that we can gauge what participants in our training are actually taking away from it. And as you can see, they're learning important aspects around autism and neurodiversity in the workplace. So thinking about, communication styles and how universal design can benefit everybody, not just neurodivergent employees. So now over to our guests. So I'm going to start with Beth. So Beth, tell me about your background and what drives your passion for enhancing diversity and inclusion, and why did you start a business like 4GR?
Thanks, Meredith. I've worked in many roles, but basically my capabilities in corporate HR and organisational capability. During that time, I really watched candidates fall through the gaps as far as the rigid recruitment processes, psychometric testing failing and not doing well in interviews. And that really kind of struck a chord that we were really missing out on great candidates that shouldn't be overlooked. So I left the corporate world and started in the social services sector. 12 years ago, I met my best friend and now business partner, Jill, and we started 4GR in 2013. We have that strong sense of passion that everyone has the right. It's part of the UN Charter of Rights that we have a meaningful economic contribution to our community and really have a valued social role. And that's certainly what we thrive on at 4GR. We use the customised employment model. It's tried and true in the UK and the US, and we get really great results. And yeah, that's what I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. That's great. Chris, tell us a bit about the ICANN network. And as you can see, I'm actually sharing an ICANN quote. You know, awareness means you know I'm here, but acceptance means you're happy to see me. So we'd love to hear a little bit about the ICANN network. And also, once you were quoted in an article as saying, if you can deploy them cleverly and set up the right support structures, they can do 2 weeks of work in 2 days. So maybe you could also unpack this a little bit for us, and maybe how businesses could work with autistic people and how should they deploy them. So Chris, over to you.
All right, I'll try and keep this to 2 minutes. I'm Chris. Thanks, Meredith. Thanks for inviting me here. I'm on Wadawurrung country. I want to acknowledge traditional owners and pay respects to elders past and present. I am proudly autistic. I had an interesting work experience. I'd been blessed to have a really good time at World Vision Australia, which was a great workplace for me. They gave me loads of opportunities, and that really cushioned my entry into the workforce. But prior to that, I'd also been blessed to have a very successful secondary schooling, not because I didn't have struggles. I definitely had struggles and a lot of anxiety throughout secondary years, but I was very lucky with the principal and head of junior school who really supported my transition. And that backdrop really explains why I started ICANN. So in 2013, I finished a law degree, thank goodness. I'll never get those 7 years back. And when I finished it, I worked out, of course, I don't want to be a lawyer. That looks so boring. All that letter writing would be hell. And someone else can do that. So I said, I want to start an autistic-led organization, which, of course, you know, for my parents who, you know, you raise your kids. I have a 5-year-old now, but my parents, I think when I got to 26, I think they were hoping I'd be a bit more, dare I say, a bit more typical. But I turned around and said, no, I want to start an autistic-led company. It's going to change the world and it's going to be great. And of course, you know, there were valleys of death involved when you set up a small business. It's hard. But the vision, to answer your questions, Meredith, we wanted to create an autistic-led organization which would send autistic adults as mentors and other allies as mentors into schools, primary, secondary, specialist, combined schools, Catholic, government, all of them, and really build up the self-acceptance, pride, belonging and confidence of autistic young people, no matter where they are on the great autistic spectrum. And we've been lucky to do that. We've built up an evidence base. And on the evidence base, it's really been when you meet, I guess when you're like me and founder CEO, you do have extraordinary opportunities as you grow a small business to move people into areas that really suit their skill set. That is the blessing that a CEO and a board have. So that's a big privilege I take really seriously. And, you know, you do have, you know, I have 82 autistic staff, and among them are people who have a capacity and an ability to do 2 weeks of work in a very short space of time. That is, I still stand by that quote. Of course, we employ a very diverse range of people. So in our first 5 years, for transparency, we probably had, you know, staff with lesser support requirements. So our staff who were very verbal, quick on their feet, staff who didn't necessarily have processing delays. But now, as we've grown in our maturity and confidence, we have a very diverse base of staff. So staff with greater support requirements, intellectual delays, but they are amazing. And with the right support plans and the right manager and the right coach, they succeed. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thanks, Chris. And we'll look to unpack more of that a little bit later on. Megan, working at Monash IVF, you would have the opportunity to see people at a very sensitive and vulnerable time of their life. So why is it so important that Monash IVF understand the needs of neurodivergent people?
Thanks, Meredith. I think it's important that our people understand the concept of neurodiversity and the needs of neurodiverse people for a couple of reasons. The first being to provide more effective support to our patients throughout their journey with us and with assisted reproductive technology as well. And as you mentioned, our people, and especially those in patient-facing roles, engage with patients during a very sensitive and often emotional time in their life. And then on top of this, patients are usually provided with a lot of important information all at once, and that can be around medications, procedures, finances, counselling, from all the different departments. So that can feel overwhelming for anyone at any time. So I think it's really important that our people understand that not everyone processes information in the same way, perceives things in the same way, and reacts and behaves in the same way. So an understanding of neurodiversity can then hopefully allow our people to recognise and adjust their support methods to ensure that every individual that comes through Monash IVF feels supported and valued. I think another reason that it's really important that our people understand neurodiversity and the needs of neurodiverse people is that so we can continue building an inclusive culture within our group, as well as a supportive peer support network. I think an understanding of neurodiversity allows people to acknowledge and be more respectful of differences in needs and approaches to work as well. And if our people have an inclusive outlook, it'll contribute to a more inclusive workplace where all of our people feel supported and empowered to engage in their work comfortably.
That's great. Thanks, Megan. So now we're going to have a bit of a conversation and unpack today's topic. So the first question that the panelists will look at is, what are the key aspects to building a thriving culture of neuro-acceptance? And Megan, I might start with you. So why do you think this is important, and how do you design a workplace to do this? And then we'll hear from Chris and then maybe Beth.
Thanks, Meredith. I think building a thriving culture of neuro-acceptance within a workplace is important to ensure that it's an environment where all of its people feel valued, understood and supported. I think the first step in designing a workplace to have this culture is through education and awareness. I think it's really important that people understand what neurodiversity is and what it means, and that people are provided with thorough training and resources in this area. So at Monash IVF Group, we had yourself, Meredith, join us for an insightful and very informative session. And the feedback we received from that was all really positive. And I also think this step is really important because it helps people to develop a true understanding of neurodiversity, which many people aren't taught within school or in university. And this then helps to debunk myths and challenge common stereotypes. I think then once people understand what neurodiversity is and the true meaning of neurodiversity, the next step in delivering and developing this culture is to be inclusive and actually inspire people within the organisation to be inclusive. And this can be done through encouraging open discussions, which increases knowledge and reduces stigma. And I think it can also be done through celebrating neurodiversity, not only on days of significance, but all year round, and through things like further training, through listening to people's needs and making adjustments to work and to teams.
That's great. Thank you, Megan. So Chris, over to you. So what do you think the key aspects to building a thriving culture of neuro-acceptance is?
Firstly, it's about attitude. You need your board and management team to have the right attitude towards some of the adjustments needed for neurodivergent individuals in a workplace. You can, to quote a friend of mine, you can train the skills. You can't train the attitude. You've got to have that attitude in place. So the next step is to really look at your policies, because you will need to move away from off-the-shelf HR policies, which can be sometimes quite ineffective for neurodivergent individuals, e.g. Your grievance policy, your disciplinary and warning procedures will need a bit of a look over. Your recruitment policy will need a bit of a look over for some of the different situations that can happen in a neurodivergent workforce. In recruitment, you obviously need some flexibility there. Avoiding the elements of surprise in an interview is very useful for autistic neurodivergent people. Under disciplinary warning procedures, making sure that's really transparent and re-explaining that and sending reminders about expected behaviours, inappropriate reactions. But then that links to your grievance process. You do need an empathetic HR system and culture in your small business or larger business that can separate, the emails that might be one big meltdown or explosion from, continued sustained inappropriate communication towards an individual. There is a bit of a difference from those reactions and, things that genuinely show a pattern of poor behavior. So, but beyond that, you also need your admin systems to be enabling of autistic neurodivergent individuals. So, contracts, employment contracts, autistic neurodivergent staff can really benefit from having further explanation of what they're signing. We had a fantastic lawyer who hadn't had much experience with neurodivergent individuals, but he just worked it out. He really created summaries of the different clauses in our employment contracts, which went a long way to supporting individuals. And then on a practical work plan basis, you need to look at support plans, which are, really practical and broken down for staff based on their support requirements and their profile. So one of the best sources of help here is the adjustment plans you see in schools. Because we work in so many schools, today's teachers actually have fantastic adjustment plans for autistic neurodivergent students at their disposal. So we simply looked at those adjustment plans and replicated them in a workplace context. And that's what we use as our support plans. So we all know the truth. You see gems out there and you go, that's going to work in my sector. I'll do that here. This isn't rocket science. It's just doing what works.
Thanks, Chris. That's very helpful info. And Beth, so what are the key aspects to building a thriving culture from 4GR's perspective?
I think it's that hands-on support as well. Absolutely what Megan has said with training and what Chris has said with policies and procedures, but the onboarding process needs to be quite supportive. So time needs to be spent making sure that your new employee is welcomed and that the culture is a safe working environment. So having your team around, being trained, understanding about the individual's needs, but really having that on board support, that's a really big key part to success. Is that onboarding process needs to be well thought through. The communication needs to be correct, and that's the key fundamental. Once you've got them in and they're doing their job right, they will fly. It's amazing, and the ripple effect we all know that has. It just does take a little bit of time, and people need to understand that. It's not going to be you're coming in, you've got a new person, let's go. You've got to take the time.
Thanks, Beth. And actually, while we're with you, Beth, we might pose the next question starting with you and then Chris and then Megan. So this is around leadership. So Beth, what conversations should frontline leaders and IT managers be having with teams to help create a more neuro-inclusive environment?
Yeah, look, I think exactly what Megan was saying in that training is a big piece. Understanding what is neurodivergent, what is a neurodivergent culture? What do we want to have as a neurodivergent acceptance workplace? So having those very open conversations. We don't know. It's also about having the conversation with the individual that you have in place. How would you like your communication given to you? How would you like to have meetings? How would you like to be involved in this? We do social design in our organisation, and we have our neurodivergent participants take a big lead in designing how our product is delivered. So that is a big part of it, having those conversations.
Great, thanks, Beth. Chris, to you, what are the conversations for frontline leaders?
Very much around training, on-job training, scheduled training, supporting staff, understanding of expectations, work plans, content, what's the rocks of the program, and where might there be some variation based on the customer that they're working with. All of that are the everyday conversations. So, but I guess alongside them is, we do need to acknowledge the context we're working with with autistic neurodivergent people is a lot of people have had trauma. There's been intergenerational trauma in some families, and a history in some families of struggles at work. So there's also that layer. And so it's really important to provide, a safe environment which is giving a lot of encouragement to autistic neurodivergent staff, and wrapping them, in an environment that is very supportive, per what Beth has been talking about. So to quote Professor Lee Waters, one thing you can do to support this is just brief emotional uplifts where, you just have moments where you nurture that encouragement within a team. So in a remote team, that can be sometimes a bit more challenging, but there are ways you can do that. We send an email every Thursday called Give a Shout Out to a Colleague, where staff write back, just praising a colleague in the team that they think's been a good performer. And we have awards based on our values, and there's a strong culture around sharing customer feedback in our team. And that does a lot to shine, a bit of limelight on particularly more introverted staff who might not speak up for good practice they're doing.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. And Megan, to you, what are the conversations for frontline leaders and managers?
Thanks, Meredith. I completely agree with both Chris and Beth on this, that leaders in any organisation play a really important role in creating neuro-inclusive workplaces. And I guess from a learning and development perspective, the research shows that leaders' encouragement significantly increases people's engagement with learning opportunities. So I think if leaders are really encouraging people to take part in education pieces around neurodiversity, then it really highlights the support and inclusivity of an organisation. I also think it's really important that leaders ensure that they're having conversations with their team to ensure that their direct reports are feeling supported and that their needs are being met. And then if they're not, how can they make adjustments to better support them? And the adjustments are really important as well. They'll help people feel more supported, and it also will help with team cohesion and productivity as well.
Great, thanks, Megan. So we're going to move on now to barriers to neurodiversity, and I'm going to pose this question first to Chris, then Megan, and then Beth. So Chris, what do you see as the biggest barriers to neurodiversity in business today, and what can be done to overcome these challenges?
There's still an assumption of incompetence out there surrounding autistic neurodivergent adults. So if you, we're all in the bubble. We're all in the bubble. We're all on board here. We love it. We're all, it's in our blood. So, we're the important group to keep, giving a ripple effect out there to get others on board. But, out there, and we can all think of people, we don't need to name names, but out there is, when people hear autistic employee, they think that there's something not quite right about that person that's going to slow their business down. That is still out there. It is changing. It's much better than it was, but that is still our context. We are going to be breaking down those ideas for another 20 years. So we need to keep supporting forums like this, keep talking as a sector. We need to agitate for enabling policy conditions to support employment incentives and employment programs across small business and large business, which keeps creating, jobs and pathways for autistic neurodivergent individuals. And we're in the right time. We're in a policy environment where there's a Disability Royal Commission coming in September, in 1 month, an NDIS independent review in October, a national autism strategy. We are in the right time to agitate for long-term policy conditions here, but it is going to take 20 years.
Thanks, Chris. Megan?
Thanks, Meredith. I agree with Chris as well, but I think, again, one of the biggest barriers to neurodiversity in business at this point in time is still the lack of awareness and understanding around neurodiversity and its value. And I think, again, this stems from it not really being taught within schools and being taught within universities as well. But I do think this can certainly be overcome through specific training and education within workplaces around neurodiversity. I think another barrier which stems from a lack of understanding as well is the stigma and the stereotypes around neurodiversity. And this can be a really big barrier in the workplace because it can lead to discrimination, exclusion, and bias. And I, again, think this can be overcome through education as well as a workplace culture that's empathetic and inclusive. And lastly, I think another barrier, which may be a product of limited knowledge and stereotypes as well, is a resistance to change, which Chris spoke about. And again, I think education is really key here to provide knowledge around neurodiversity and its value.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And Beth, what do you see as the barriers?
Thank you.
There's many.
There's so many. I think going, kind of layering on top of what Chris and Megan have said, it really comes down to also the cost involved, and business can't move past the cost because we're asking for them to spend more time onboarding. We're spending more time making this a safe culture, and people are looking at that bottom line at the end of the day. And so when we're asking a business for a work integrated learning opportunity, so that's an opportunity for experiential learning, we're asking them to have an unproductive staff member being overseen by a paid staff member. So cost is a big barrier to some businesses, but we do know in the long run, when you highlight the cost, yes, onboarding may take more time, but in the long run, you're saving money because you won't need to recruit anymore. You won't need to have backfills for these positions, because if you do some, smart business job carving and having that individual who wants to do that job, we know that they will come in, they'll be on time, they'll do their job. They're not going to have the, half an hour water cooler conversation. They're just coming in to do their job and they want to do a good job at it. So from, in the long run, it makes better business sense to kind of get past that onboarding cost and work through that. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. And that kind of strengths-based approach, I suppose, and minimizing barriers is something that's really, personal to me as well, because my oldest son is still unemployed and faces that barrier every time, he puts in a job application. So thank you all for answering those questions. So and we're just going to move on to some, polling. So we ask these questions during our training, and hopefully technology will work today. But if you'd like to scan the QR code, and the number is up the top. But this is some questions that we asked during our training, and it's important that we do some fact checking and myth busting during training, and it's part of, I guess, that knowledge component that we've all been talking about today. So the first question is, autism is a mental health condition. Is this true or false? So you could pop in an answer there. VVox is, as I mentioned, is anonymous. So we don't actually know who's putting in what answers. And I'm being, cruel here. I'm forcing you into either a true or a false.
False.
So go ahead and have an answer. I'm going to
Meredith? Can I just, while we're answering these questions, could I just quickly make a quick comment to Beth? And Beth, thank you for raising the cost to business, because that's often a big perception that it's going to cost them more. But we are all about selling those neurodiverse strengths, which are absolutely amazing. And as Chris said before, if you give them the right support, they can do 2 weeks of work in 2 days. And we see that time and time again. And we've got clients who are absolutely amazed by how they finish work with the speed of light, and then come back to their manager and say, well, what have you got for me now? So and not only that, it's also looking at problems from a different angle. So this problem solving approach, where it's just wows people, and it's really about having that putting in the effort at the beginning, but then really receiving those rewards. And I think that's what we're here all about, advocating this and explaining to people that it's really worth doing. So thank you, Beth. Now I've got one question here. Megan, this is for Megan. Do you get many autistic people accessing services of Monash IVF, and how do you go about working with these clients? I think that's an interesting question. Also, Megan, would they explain beforehand that they're on the spectrum? Do they disclose that?
A tricky question, because the way that IVF works is people see a lot of clinicians before coming through to have IVF. So it might be something that people disclose to their clinician and that themselves and their clinician work with. In terms of a number, I can't really give you a number, because again, it's confidential and it's really between the clinician and the patient. But I guess how we go about working with these clients, I guess it just comes back down to being empathetic and adjusting support tools to patients based on their needs. And it might not be in terms of asking if someone has autism. It might just be asking if they prefer to have their appointment times texted or through a phone call. Just little adjustments based on people's needs. But in terms of our patient-facing people understanding whether someone has neurodiversity or not, we wouldn't really know.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'm going to hand over back to Meredith now.
Thanks, Yvonne. No worries at all. Okay, so in this particular question, autism is a mental health condition. It is actually false. And so thank you to everybody who answered this poll. Autism is not a mental health condition. A person with autism may also have a mental health condition, but autism itself is not a mental health condition. And it's important that we share this knowledge with everybody. And we know from our autistic self-advocates, we're getting a much better understanding of autism and what it means. Okay, so the next question. Autism is an intellectual disability. Is this true or false? And again, this is completely anonymous, and I'm forcing you into a true or a false, just to do some fact checking and to have a conversation. And in a moment, I'm going to close the poll, and then we can just compare the results of today's polling against the polling, in fact, that we take during our training. So I'm going to.
Sorry, Meredith, while you're doing that,
you want to do another question?
To ask another
Absolutely.
Question.
Go
this
for it.
This question is for you, Chris. Chris, do you think it is more challenging for autistic people to start a small business?
No, I think you need that autistic hyperfocus can be a huge asset to you when you start a small business.
So it could actually be an advantage.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Back to you, Meredith.
Thanks, Yvonne. So I'm going to close that poll. Okay, so autism is an intellectual disability. That is false. So again, we now have a much better understanding these days than we did, even 20 years ago, plus when my oldest son was first diagnosed. We know that autism is not an intellectual disability. However, an autistic person may also have an intellectual disability, but it's a separate condition. And obviously people with autism can have co-occurring conditions as well. So as you can see in the first question of our poll today, about 30-something% of people answered the question and have learned that the correct answer. So it's during our NIS training, we're finding that about 30% of participants are learning more about the condition. So learning that autism is not a mental health condition and learning that it's not an intellectual disability, which is very important. So now, Yvonne, have you got a few more questions for everybody? I'm going to hand over to you.
So yeah, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. We've answered 2 of the questions that we had. I mean, I have certainly learned a lot in this last 40 minutes, even though, I've been working in the field for some time, but you never stop learning. And, I love the term from Chris to if you give the person the right support, they can do 2 weeks of work in 2 days, which we often see. So let's see. Here's another question. Oh yeah, there's another question. It's quite a long question, so I'm going to read this out and let's see who can answer this. As an autistic engineer, I'm concerned about the messaging that autistic people finish tasks quicker than neurotypicals. Don't forget, autistic people often prefer to be specialists rather than generalists, which means they spend more time on deep dive and learning around topics. This can result in a task being finished quicker due to deeper knowledge, but can also be slower because they're doing checks and balances and being more thorough or higher quality, resulting in slower finishing. Can someone comment on this? Maybe Chris.
Very good question. It's
yes.
Yeah. Can I just summarize my interpretation of that question? My interpretation is you're wanting discussion around whether autistic staff are generalists or specialists.
Yes.
Number 1. And number 2, you're wanting to avoid them being kind of boxed into one category of being engineers or being in similar analytical type roles. Is that the guts of the question?
I think that's what it means. Yes. And that's because if they're specialists, obviously there's more of a deep dive into a topic, hence you're more thorough and understand it better.
Yeah, look, I can only speak on my lived experience, but I've seen both. I've seen both autistic generalists and specialists. I think as someone's confidence in a workplace grows, probably they broaden from a set specialty to being quite a generalist. So that's just been what I've observed. You definitely see some autistic neurodivergent adults who take up a certain specialty, but I employ a lot of people who might have a specialty outside of work, but then at work they can really cover the general aspects of their job. So that's definitely what I see. I obviously ICANN network, we're not in the data analytics space. We're in the education space. So we're trying to support pathways for autistic adults to become educational learning support staff or teachers or disability support workers. I mean, that's basically what they are in ICANN. So that's what we're motivated by.
And Yvonne, also, I think it's important just to remember that autism is a spectrum.
Yep.
And so therefore, yes, we know that everybody is different and an individual. As Stephen Shaw said, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And so whilst, at times we might talk about people being a specialist and also the speed at which they get through work, obviously everybody's different, and not everybody may be in that category where they're necessarily getting through work as fast as everybody else, and they may be more in line with the non-autistic population.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Meredith. So look, I mean, how to build a neuro-inclusive culture. So thank you, from your insights. Megan, you said it's all about education and awareness. Because we want to debunk myths and stereotypes, which is really important, and then also inspire people to become more inclusive. Chris, thank you. It's all about attitude. If you're not willing to do it, then then don't do it, because you won't be successful. And it's about having an empathetic HR system. And talking about hiring strategies, hiring processes, yes, they have to be obviously looked at from a different angle. Then often they need to be redone and rewritten. We certainly do our hiring very different. We don't have a conventional hiring process, because it just doesn't work. Beth, I liked what you said, that you involved the neurodivergent people into workplace design, because it's about them, not about you, and also in the product design of what you're selling. And then we talked about barriers to neurodiversity, and yes, there are still a lot, and we see that every day, but we are on the right path. Yes, there's still an assumption of incompetence of neurodiverse people out there, which is very unfortunate, and that's why we're here to keep talking, having these forums, being an advocate, and also lack of awareness, and also lack of understanding of the value what neurodiversity can bring into a company. And Megan, thank you for mentioning this resistance to change. And once we understand the benefits, the costs to onboarding someone are absolutely negligent, because the benefits absolutely outweigh the costs. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Meredith, for hosting this. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Beth, for joining us and for your insights. And this has been really extremely valuable for everyone. And please ensure that you join us for the final webinar in this series, which is on the 13th of September. And this next one is called "How to Empower Neurodivergent Talent to Enrich Your Innovation Strategy." And this will be hosted by our very own Murray Wolfson, who is Audicon's technical director. And this session will focus on the holy grail of corporate success and innovation. If you have any questions on, about Audicon, what we do and how we can help you on your, neurodiversity journey, please get in touch with us. There will also be a recording of this webinar, which we'll be sending out later. So if you want to share this with your colleagues, please feel free to do so. Now I'm going to hand over back to Simon. Are you here, Simon? Yes.
I am. Thanks, Yvonne. Thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation and the Q&A and the insight in relation to productive workplaces and embedding neuro-acceptance into the culture of an organization. It's really, really important for the technology industry in particular that we embrace neurodiversity, because we keep talking about the skills talent shortage in Australia, and it's an important area of talent that we need to tap into. So there's been another fantastic conversation today. Thank you very much. This recording will be available shortly in the AAA portal, as Yvonne mentioned, and look forward to the next conversation. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all. Thank you.